Hello and welcome to Agency Office Hours. I'm Karl Sakas at Sakas & Company, answering questions every month about helping you grow your agency more profitably. Here's a preview of the questions we'll be talking about today. Stephanie in Texas has a question about benchmarks for agency profit margins. Beth in Pennsylvania has a question about how to find account managers these days. We'll talk about what is a typical weekly workload for you as an agency leader. Then Blake in South Carolina has a question about where to find a unicorn employee. Yes, a full-time developer. And finally, Katie in Texas has a question about client retention. What do you do when a client seems to forget that they have a contract and they want to leave early and you would rather they did not? You do have options. If that sounds familiar to you, either you've experienced it before, you're experiencing it now, you will surely experience it in the future. Stick around, we'll talk about your options and what you can do there in that particular situation. If I mentioned your question, Stephanie, Beth, Blake, and Katie, you'll be up in that order. Be ready to unmute yourself and be on video. If I didn't mention you and you'd like to ask a future question, please include it when you RSVP. We're meeting every second Tuesday, every month. As usual, we are recording office hours today, so don't share anything out loud that you don't want to potentially become public. And if you're watching live, you'll get a copy of the recording via email within 24 hours. And if you're watching the video already, well, hit the subscribe button and you'll get future updates. All right, well, our first question today is from Stephanie in Texas. Stephanie, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, great. Welcome and thank you for joining.
Oh, thanks for having me. So I emailed Karl the other day. I actually have signed up for his next session that I'm excited about, and was like, can you please help me with one question real quick? Trying to work on our numbers and trying to figure out what a benchmark is for profit margins for net revenue. Not gross, but net, once everything has been fleshed out and paid for. What is a good number for us to be looking at? I've seen anywhere from 9 to 35%. And so I'm just kind of wondering, where should we be looking to be at?
And for sure, that will vary by agency, but here's my recommended benchmark. We could talk about how that number comes about, and then we can customize it to you. My general benchmark for agency net profit margins is 20 to 30%. That is, after paying everyone, including all owners, you have 20 to 30% left over before taxes. Most agencies are pass-through entities, so you're going to pay taxes from that, but that's 20 to 30% net profit margins before taxes. Now, how does that come about? Well, let's assume that 100% is your total agency services revenue. We're going to set aside things like pass-through expenses. If you do media buying, that you mark it up a bit, but most of that money goes out to the publishing companies. We're not counting that. Same things on referral fees and stuff like that. We're focusing on your services revenue. So if that's 100%, 50 to 60% of that is going to go to labor. Labor includes all owner compensation under my calculation, all owner compensation, employee compensation, including non-owner employees, and key ongoing contractors. So this would be, for instance, a contractor who's helping, 10 hours every week or almost every week. In a sense, they're going into your full-time equivalent calculation as a quarter of a full-time equivalent. So 50 to 60% of your services revenue is going out the door for labor, including your own compensation as an agency leader. What about the rest? Well, typically about 20% of your services revenue going toward overhead. That includes rent for an office or offices, if you have an office these days. That also includes things like subscriptions to, say, the hosting for your own website, or subscriptions to your project management system, things that you would not be rebilling to clients. And that also include things like, employee recognition awards, annual, holiday parties, and travel expenses for getting people together for team retreats and things like that. That's 20%. Well, if you've got 50 to 60%, you've got 20%, that leaves 20 to 30% for net profit margins. Of course, you could do profit first and you can take that out at the beginning and then set aside the rest, but that's the general formula. Now, we can customize that a bit, but Stephanie, any questions about that?
No, I think that breaks it down nicely. Thank you.
Now, sometimes people ask, if we are primarily a remote agency, what does that do? Well, if you have a primarily remote agency or fully remote, you're likely not to have the same kind of office expenses as if you had a headquarters, but you're going to have some other expenses. For instance, getting people together, whether it's once a year, twice a year, 3 times, even 4 times a year. Typically, I see agencies that are remote getting people together 2 or 3 times a year. But, go with what works. Some agencies will have a cluster of employees where people are, kind of clustered around a particular spot. I have a client who has a remote agency with a cluster of employees in Ottawa, Canada, so they'll often get together. Another client has a cluster of employees in Tampa, Florida, in sort of the Tampa area. So, in that case, some agencies may opt to have a co-working space subscription of some sort so that people can get together in some way, whether it's having a desk or having a suite or just having the subscription so people can meet up a couple times a month kind of thing. So it is worth considering that even fully remote, you likely will not eliminate all of your real estate expenses, and you also are going to be boosting certainly travel and potentially other expenses to get people together. But it likely will be lower than that 20%. Now, Stephanie, you mentioned you had heard ranges of between 9% and 35%. 9% would be pretty low. If someone reaches out for my consulting help and their net is 9%, it's like, we better fix that because they don't have a huge amount of runway and flexibility in their numbers. That can be a challenge. 35% can work. For instance, if you have a team based near you and you also maybe have a team in a lower labor cost country, yeah, you could get to 35%. Do keep in mind that if your net margins are significantly above 30%, like 35 is probably fine, but if it's like 40 or 50%, you're probably understaffed. For instance, spoke with an agency owner in Australia several years ago. He said that his net margins were 65%. And I initially assumed there was some sort of a calculation error, but no, it was in fact 65%, yet there was one important catch. He was drastically understaffed. For instance, he had just sold a $20,000 a month retainer that he expected to do himself, in addition to running the business and taking care of other clients. He reached out to me a few months into doing that, and no surprise, that was not working. The thing is, he had room to hire people. He just had opted not to. So, for everyone listening, if your net margins are dramatically above 30% and things feel a little crunched and everyone seems, really overloaded, yeah, you probably are. And you have room in the budget to invest in additional team members. Which of course are the right team members. Well, we'll talk a bit more later today about some of the roles you can hire. And we'll also share a link to my agency roles article in chat if you're joining live. So Stephanie, any follow-up questions on that as you're sorting out, generally that 20 to 30% net profit margin benchmark, but you can adjust up somewhat or down somewhat. For instance, if you're planning to invest a lot for growth, maybe you're adding a new management layer, maybe you target 15% for the year because that then, pays off in the future. Any follow-up questions?
No, thank you for that detail.
Absolutely. Well, Stephanie, thank you for joining. All right. Well, next up, Q&A is Beth in Pennsylvania. Beth, if you want to see, you're on video and you're unmuted. Welcome. Thanks for joining Agency Office Hours.
Yes, thank you for having me. This is great already. I don't have a lot of networking in agencies. I really like none. I grew the business myself. I had been in marketing. I found a niche in the water industry, and we've just grown exponentially. We are, I'm in Philadelphia, and I have one of those hubs, like you said, like where a lot of people are fully remote, but a lot of us are in the Philadelphia area. And we've just kind of grown with like part-timers. People don't want to work full-time. So I've got this sort of like wonderful hodgepodge of people who are helping us run this. But I think we're in that group that you mentioned where we're highly profitable, but severely understaffed. And so I'm trying so hard to find an account, like a full-time account executive manager, whatever you want to call it, director, supervisor, somebody to take off my weight, because I'm still sort of like the key contact for the clients, and I really need to spend time running the business. So I've done a little bit on LinkedIn. I haven't bit the bullet with a recruiter, but I might need to do that. So I just wondered if you had any insight as far as, I don't know if this economy is contributing to being hard to find people, but I need somebody that will either can be trained to take over sort of my day-to-day with clients, or somebody who knows more than I do and can come add value. I don't know which level, but okay. Any advice?
Yes. Well, let's sort that out. And by the way, for anyone who's listening live, if you have things that have worked well for you in finding account managers or at your agency, please share that in chat to help with Beth's question. So, Beth, ultimately, your question is, where do you find full-time account managers these days? In particular, you're looking for someone to take over dealing with day-to-day client kind of being the contact and things like that. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Yes. Just making sure that the clients are getting what they need, really intimately knowing, so that they don't need to take over all of mine. And I do have people managing some clients that specialize in their areas, but somebody who would kind of know what's going on all around.
That makes sense. Well, a key point to consider is, are your account managers doing strategy as well? That is, are they keeping clients happy, taking care of them, and are they also ultimately making recommendations for clients around what they should do from a strategic perspective? Because that determines the right match, even down to the job posting and where you promote it. So what are your thoughts on that? Are they just the client contact, keep the clients happy, sell them more work, or are they also recommending what the client should do strategically?
They are recommending what a client can do strategically. So I need somebody strategic. So for the bigger clients, I'm still doing that. And because I'm the one with sort of like all the industry knowledge, I kind of tend to get involved. And if I don't, it doesn't go as well. But I have like people who have clients with social media contracts are sort of being managed by one account manager, and then she's great at recommending social media related things, but she's also kind of handling the other integrated marketing as well. And same, I have somebody that's fantastic with PR, and same thing, she's totally competent to make offer strategic direction. So yes, I want someone that level, I think.
I'm sorry, what was the last part?
Yes, I think I'm looking for somebody who can come on and do strategy, not just a client support person.
With that in mind, it sounds like a key thing is find people who would be good with clients, but who have started in your case, the water industry. For some agencies, especially if you're a generalist agency, the account manager just needs to know, the way I describe it, just needs to know enough. Enough is going to vary dramatically. For instance, if you're doing highly technical work, enough is going to be pretty high. But given that you need them to be a strategic advisor to clients, I would focus first on people who have the technical and industry experience and have the potential to be client facing. And, most likely the people to do that probably are working in-house in the PR and communications department at water utilities, water related engineering companies, things like that. For instance, one of my consulting clients as a high school and college student in the 1990s, early 2000s, before joining a communications agency, had been the director of communications for a major water utility for like 15, 20 years. And then she went into working in an agency. And they worked with a range of topics. It wasn't just water related, but that experience working in a regulated industry was helpful and things like that. Are you finding people who've, say, worked at water-related organizations doing marketing or communications, right? Especially if they're the spokesperson, they're going to have experience, saying the right things like that. Have you met people who are looking to change? Maybe they're tired of having just the one client they're working on, their employer, and they're looking for some variety. What are you noticing right now?
Well, I did kind of start in that direction in my search, kind of reaching out to other people like I was like in marketing, whether marketing communications or PR, whatever, in water related, anything, manufacturing companies, whatever. But what I found, I think, is that at least the people that I've been thinking of are not familiar and comfortable with an agency vibe. So like with an agency, it's very different, having been on both sides. An agency is fast and deadline oriented and so many different, different clients. So like none of my clients are big enough that I would have like a person on a client. Like it's multiple clients per account manager, because we don't do that. We're not that big yet. So far that hasn't, like the people that I've talked to were definitely, I kind of moved, I talked to a recruiter in the water industry and he said kind of maybe consider moving into somebody that has the agency experience, because that's what I don't have. And none of my people, well, that's not true. Some of them do now, but that's so, I can teach the water. I can send people to conferences. I can make introductions, but it's hard to teach someone, the deadline driven, the vibe in an agency is a little bit different than working at a marketing department.
Given that you're seeing that where you can teach water, but the challenge of finding the agency experience, it may be worth considering, are there agencies that are adjacent? So for instance, my colleague Diane worked at an agency for many years that did a lot of agricultural marketing. There are water components to kind of thing. Like, are there people that are maybe not doing the exact work, but related, or maybe it's something related to architecture, engineering, marketing, kind of thing, where they've got the general mindset and they've worked with technical clients. They're not going to be exactly the same, but there may be some overlap. Thoughts on that direction?
Yeah, that's a great idea, actually. Yes, like even if I could focus in a little bit more on the environmental sector, that covers a lot of different things, but water falls into that. So, and that's a big part of communication for water right now, is definitely the environmental aspects of it. So yeah, that's a great idea. And just kind of searching for other firms that are like that, and then just, poking around to see who's available without, blatantly poaching anybody, I guess.
Well, I mean, they're saying that, if you're looking for employees, there are two ways to get them. You can grow them or steal them. So in this case, it sounds like it's a bit of both, right? Steal them and then grow in the particular area. One thing that I do recommend before you bring someone on board, obviously you're starting working through the process, is to consider what are the tiers of knowledge that they need to know over time. What do they need to know week 1? What do they need to know month 1, month 2, month 3, and so on. And Kate, if you could share our article on new hire ramp-up plans for Beth and for everyone else, we have examples. The article has 7 different scenarios, everything from hiring a subject matter expert, a strategist, account manager, project manager, salesperson, operations, so on. In fact, when I onboarded a new team member, I created that in advance of here's what needs to happen in week 1, month 1, 2, and so on. And ultimately, we're able to see what's on track, and also even just are people ahead of schedule. The key thing you want to avoid is a client who had hired a salesperson 18 months earlier. She asked for my help, said he's not hitting his quota. I said, oh, how long has he been missing his quota? The answer, the whole time.
Yeah.
I know some of my clients have heard that story before. You know, it takes time to ramp up, but make sure that you and the new team member are on the same page about how long it's going to take. Because if they're not going to work out, don't wait a year and a half. Ideally, you can make a decision sooner. And one piece to consider, and this doesn't directly apply on the client-facing piece, but if you find someone who's a match and there's not a direct conflict and it doesn't violate their current agreements, you know, is there some sort of a freelance project you could have them do? You know, is there some sort of thing on the side they could do where you sort out, you know, do they know what they're doing beyond just what they're saying? You are going to have a more manual recruiting process than many of the people on the call, because you're looking for a unique combo of things. But that's a direction to consider. And any follow-up questions on that?
No, that's great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, Beth, thank you for your question. So, you know, coming up, here's a preview of what's coming up. We'll be looking, speaking of recruiting full-time developers. Yes, that kind of unicorn in hiring. And finally, we'll look at client retention when a client wants to fire you. You do have options. You know, you're not at their mercy for everything that happens. But first, a bonus tip from our sponsor, Sakas & Company. Today's office hours is sponsored by Sakas & Company, helping you grow your agency more profitably this year and beyond. I often get asked, what is a normal weekly workload for an agency leader, for an agency owner or other team member? Well, that answer is going to vary. I would say I typically see people working 40 to 55 hours a week, but I also have some clients who are working 20 hours a week, and I've also met people who are working 80 hours a week or more. If you're working 80 hours a week or more, you're definitely an outlier in terms of the overall distribution of hours, but certainly not uncommon. 80 is tough, right? You're working so much that it's hard to make changes. I don't know any agency owners who are actively involved in their business that are working the 4-hour work week. That is something of an unrealistic fantasy. The one exception for that is that if you hire someone to be the CEO of your agency, we have some people in the upcoming Work Less, Earn More bootcamp who've been hired as the president or CEO by the owner, so the owner can step back. Yes, if you have people running things for you, you can step back. A client in Belgium did that, where we did some coaching work, and he ultimately transitioned things for another team member to be the CEO, and he ultimately has moved into a chair role, executive chair, that kind of thing. In that case, yes, you know, he's down to about 4 hours a month, but importantly, he's paying healthy compensation. He has delegated just about everything, and he has good incentive alignment on compensation for the team member who's running things. So if you want to work 4 hours a week, it's going to take a while to get there, or even, well, or 4 hours a month. It's going to take some time to get there. But typical is 40 to 55. You know, I have some people who say, I don't really care about the exact hours I'm working as long as it's paying off. That's especially true for people who are leaning toward, if we think about the lifestyle versus equity continuum for running your agency. Lifestyle is keep running the agency indefinitely, you know, get good above market compensation, but focus on the work you want to do. Equity more about grow the agency to sell in the future. For people who lean toward the equity side, I'll often hear a version of that comment about, I don't really care about the hours. I just want to make sure I'm growing the valuation. You know, in that case, my work often focuses on how to shift to do the work they want. For instance, you know, if they don't love doing client billables, you know, how to delegate that. If they don't love being the account manager, how to shift that. If they don't, like some other aspect of the agency, shift that. For instance, if you don't like doing sales, you don't have to do every single aspect of sales, right? You've got the initial qualifying, and then you're doing some further qualification, some sort of a call, maybe some follow-up bits. Then eventually you're doing some consulting, proposal, negotiation, and closing. You could focus on the later stages of the sales process if you don't like doing the very early stage stuff. I mean, I've delegated that to my team. I don't mind doing it, but it's not the best use of my time as the business owner. So my team does initial screening and then points people to me once people are qualified. Now, if the idea of reducing your workload is of interest to you, I would encourage you to apply to my Work Less, Earn More bootcamp. The next edition is coming up in Q1 of 2022, January and February of 2022. We are almost sold out. So if you're interested and you haven't already applied or have applied and been accepted, then of course, you're in. Finalizing the applications, if you're interested, my colleague Kate will share the link to learn more and apply about the program January, February 2022. Over 6 weeks, 3 to 5 hours a week, including live sessions, you and a cohort, a total of 35 agency owners and leaders, you'll each create a custom 90-day plan to help you jumpstart 2022. If you're interested, I look forward to reading your application. Well, next up, we have a question from Blake in South Carolina. Blake, if you want to see your own video and you're unmuted, welcome and thank you for joining Agency Office Hours.
Great, Karl. It's good to see you again. I originally saw you up at the HubSpot conference, probably about 4 or 5 years ago. So I know you probably keep tabs on where people first heard about you, so you can write that down. So
thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Go ahead.
We are looking to hire a full-time employee front-end developer, and gratefully, we a few years ago shifted to a contractor model, and we're able to leverage pretty much full-time contractors. So when we were busy, we could leverage them, and then when we were not as busy, then we could kind of shrink back up, and that helped in some ways. But we really noticed from a cultural perspective, you can't make contractors do certain things. And so we just kind of noticed over time, we wanted to make sure our cash flow was healthy before we went back and hired full-time developers again. And so we're there. And so everything you've been kind of hearing about, or everybody's been hearing about the past 12 to 18 months from the labor shortage, we're seeing it right now. And so, but gratefully, like I said, we have contractors in place, so we're not in a bad spot, but we're really trying to plan for future growth in our culture. So quickly, I'll just kind of spit out some of the things that we've done so far. But in the past, typically right now, we've been advertising for about a month. Right now, typically in the past, we have more resumes than we know what to do with. It's really kind of creating the yes, no, maybe piles and kind of starting there. But now we have 18 that have applied in the past month. And about half of those are overseas. And so that's not a route that we're wanting to take. And so we've created a landing page on our website that really gives the clear expectations and really more context on the ideal candidate. We are advertising on ZipRecruiter, Indeed, and those have usually provided some pretty good candidates in the past. We've got a pretty good relationship with a lot of local avenues, networks, similar organizations, and here in Columbia, South Carolina. We have promoted it occasionally on our company social media, LinkedIn and Facebook. Something that I thought about last week was possibly going back to our previous database of previously submitted front-end developer resumes and just trying to throw it back out there and see if we could get any interest from somebody who may have applied in the past. But something, and this is unfounded, but this is a theory that I've heard about from others, is that a lot of the larger companies and bigger markets, obviously Columbia, South Carolina is not even close to a big market, but San Francisco, Austin, some of those, they're able to go in and kind of poach and grab a lot of the small market talent.
Yes.
Because everybody can work remote now. And so, I've just heard that from some other agency leaders. And so I just wanted to get your perspective. Is there an area that I'm not thinking of? Is it just patience and we're in the holiday time and probably not a good time to be advertising? Just wanted to see, and hopefully somebody else on here can learn as well on some things that that we need to possibly think about.
Absolutely. And for everyone else who's listening live, if you have your secret to finding developers, please share that in chat. If you're willing to reveal your secrets, there are plenty of developers to go around. So Blake, ultimately, you're on the right track. You're advertising the full-time developer role in different places. Question, what is your openness to hiring someone remotely yourself?
Well, I probably should have given some more context on our company. We've been fully remote since about 10 months before the pandemic. So I think it was June or July of 2019, we went remote. So we are looking for remote.
Got it. So that is a potential recruiting thing to highlight, which is that you've been remote before the pandemic. You know, there are a lot of companies that went into panic mode and, you know, what do we do now? You know, my business has been primarily remote since 2013. I mean, I was working remotely as a web designer in high school and college. You know, some clients I worked with where we didn't meet for several years, you know, kind of thing. So the fact that you were remote intentionally rather than reactively is something worth highlighting. And also consider highlighting that the role will stay remote, right? That this, or I assume that is the direction, right? You'll continue remote, is that correct, Blake?
Yes, it is.
That's worth highlighting. There was just a New York Times article earlier this week about large corporations are abandoning the RTO, return to office date. You know, they've extended. Who knows what's going to happen? But the fact that you can say to your hires, whether developers or otherwise, we are not going to make you come to the office beyond like general, you know, team retreats and occasional meetings and things like that, where you fly people in or they drive in or that kind of thing. That is a recruiting strength, right? There are plenty of companies that are like reluctantly remote and they're going to get back to in-person as quickly as possible. So the fact that you're, you know, remote forever is a recruiting strength, being intentional and being remote going forward. So that don't discount that. And I think my colleague Kate has shared my article about other recruiting strengths for being a smaller agency. You know, if you're competing with someone who wants to get hired as an engineer at Facebook or the other FANG companies, you know, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, you're not going to compete with that. Right. If someone's being offered $300,000, you know, they should take it. You know, agencies are not paying developers $300,000. I mean, many agency owners aren't paying themselves $300,000. Some certainly are. But, you know, thinking about it, developers are something of a unicorn for hiring in general. Thinking about when I was an employee at two agencies, both agencies, this is like, you know, circa 2010 onward, both agencies had developers who were full-time remote. This was back when not that many people were working remotely. Why? Because they were really good at their job and they wanted to move. And so, you know, they kept their job remotely. You know, we had a team member, I was in North Carolina, we had a team member who'd moved to Ohio and you know, he was great. And so like, it was worth the registering in the extra state and things like that to deal with that. So good developers have always been able to negotiate remote work. Now, of course, there are more companies that are open to remote work. So in a sense, you know, if we think about supply and demand, you know, more and more companies need developers and they're willing to be remote. So the question to consider, and you'll want to reflect on this, you know, after our conversation today, what are the unique strengths about working for your agency versus an enormous tech firm? You know, for instance, they're going to talk to you. Like if you work at Facebook, you're probably not going to meet Mark Zuckerberg, you know, kind of thing. Or if you do, something has gone wrong, and you know all that. So, you know, consider what are the strengths. I would consider advertising. You mentioned ZipRecruiter. Indeed, I'd recommend considering advertising on We Work Remotely as well. The key thing is that for whatever site or sites you're thinking of advertising on, do they have other job postings that are similar to yours? Like, are they hiring other developers? For instance, when I hired recently for a marketing-oriented executive assistant with an eye toward becoming operations manager, director of operations, and so on, I had previously posted a role at flexjobs.com, but what I noticed was that there wasn't someone with that combo of admin and marketing experience, so I didn't post it there. I did post a We Work Remotely, got some good candidates. Ultimately, the right match, Kate, hi Kate, came in through LinkedIn. I had posted in Jazz, the applicant tracking system. They syndicated it out, including doing a free LinkedIn post, and that's actually how she found it. Don't forget LinkedIn as well. LinkedIn obviously wants you to pay, but free options work as well. Do keep in mind that your ideal candidate is probably someone who is lightly disgruntled at their current role. Like if they're hugely disgruntled, there are probably some other challenges as well, but maybe they don't feel fully appreciated. Or maybe their company is saying, all right, well, remote's over, come on in again, kind of thing. And the question, of course, is where to find them. I think the thing you mentioned about reaching out to past applicants may be a good match. Now, you'll probably want to be selective about which people get the follow-up. Like if someone was totally unqualified, or for instance, they weren't authorized to work in the US and you need that for hiring as an employee, you're not going to reach out to everyone. But the opportunity is this. Ask if they might be interested in applying for the role, if they seem generally qualified. And this is the thing to take it further. Do they know someone who's looking? Do they know someone who is lightly disgruntled and is looking for a change? Because developers are hearing from recruiters all the time. And if you were cold messaging them, they're going to ignore it. A friend is a UX designer, and his sort of standard thing is like, don't even respond. Now, that seems a little short-sighted. Like at some point, he's going to want to move to something new, and it probably would work better if he's like, hey, not looking now, but thanks. But, if you're getting 20 messages a week, you're going to start ignoring them. So with that in mind, thoughts on what, how you might approach the past applicants, asking sort of any follow-up questions on that?
No, it sounds like my biggest takeaway is that at Facebook, you can't meet Mark Zuckerberg, but at our company, you can talk to me whenever you want. So I'll update the job description. I'm teasing. No, that's all really great. I appreciate that. It just kind of confirms some of the things that we've done, but we were just trying to think outside the box a little bit and maybe try to catch some others.
You're on the right track. I think there is that question of, is there a point where you need to engage a recruiter? Maybe. I would consider some of the other updates we discussed first. The fact that you have contract developers helping now means it's not quite it's not crisis mode. Like you've got help.
Right. It's
not like there's no one to do it. I would also recommend, if you haven't already, ask your existing freelance developers. Might they be interested in full-time, and or do they know someone who might be? In my experience, really good developers often like being full-time freelancers because they have a lot of flexibility, that kind of thing. My WordPress developer, Scott, I've worked with him in different roles, including at one of the agencies since 2011, and he is a full-time freelancer. So like, if you're really good, some people are going to do that. On the other hand, people may have kind of life-related changes. Maybe they experienced a medical issue and they're like, all right, they need health insurance, like that they're not paying huge amounts for, or maybe there's been some sort of a life change. Perhaps they've had kids or they're caring for a parent or something like that. And it's time for the stability. Maybe it wasn't right before, but now's the right time. So good luck as you work through things. Let me know how it goes. And thanks for asking your question today.
Yeah, Carl, thank you.
So our final question for today is from Katie. Let me go ahead and Let's see. So you're unmuted, you're on video. Awesome. Well, Katie, thanks for joining today.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So my question is what to do when a client wants to end their contract early. We didn't see much of this in the past. I have to imagine some of this has to do with the Great Resignation because it tends to happen when there's a new point of contact.
Yes.
And perhaps they beg, say they didn't know, or they make assumptions about the contract. And so where's that line between protecting your revenue and then, not burning a bridge?
You're right that when a client contact changes or client decision maker changes, very often they're going to find a new agency. My colleague Kate is going to share my article about client executive turnover. Really, we can predict what's going to happen. There's a joke that when there's a new CEO or a new CMO or other executive type leader, they've got 3 jobs to do: hire someone, fire someone, and rearrange the furniture. So sometimes your agency gets hired, right? You've got a client who maybe left the company, they're at a new company, and they're like, hey, I like working with you, let's bring you in. Sometimes you're hired, sometimes you're fired, and sometimes, like the furniture, you get rearranged. So it's a fact of life. If the client contact changes, be ready for that. But we can look at this sort of more generally. My initial question would be, when this happens, do you want to keep the client? Sometimes the client that is firing you and wants out of the contract early, you're celebrating, right? They were, if they were toxic, ideally you fired them first. If they were sort of borderline, maybe this is a win, and you're like, oh, we're sorry to lose you. Mute, not really, unmute. And then, we're willing to release you from the contract early. Here are all of the files. Best wishes in the future. So it's like technically they fired you, but you're happy for them to go. On the other hand, if you want them to stay, then you're going to want to do some other things. So in this particular example, don't name the specific client name, because again, this is recorded and it'll be on YouTube and all that. But is this a client you'd like to keep or not?
Most of the time, no. Sometimes yes. In the most recent example I can think of, the client had hired somebody new and wanted to get out of the contract in 30 days, whereas we have a 90-day out. Ultimately, we agreed on 45 days. But it's not great for cash forecasting, and all of a sudden you have to remove that revenue from your plan.
Absolutely. And congrats on getting it extended. 45 isn't 90, but it's also not 30, right? It gives you, that transition there. So, if we think of the continuum, it's a client you want to get rid of, great. Tell them you're happy to let them go, and maybe you're not going to enforce the kill fee, or you'll waive the kill fee or early termination fee, that kind of thing. Give them their files, and then bye-bye. In a case where you'd like to keep the client, one of the key things to think about would be, what are they trying to accomplish? What are they trying to do here? For instance, if it's, new CMO and they need to shake things up, hire someone, fire someone, arrange furniture, they need to show the CEO that they're getting things done. I think for many agencies, the CMO is this sort of mythical figure, right? They control the marketing budget, and, you want to keep them happy. Yet, here's the thing. So all of my consulting work is with agencies, exclusively with agencies, but through a marketing association, I run a CMO only mastermind group as a volunteer with the marketing association. And so I'm hearing what CMOs say when agencies are not in the room. And they might seem mythical on the outside, but they're human. They are human. They're concerned about pressure from the CEO. Sort of a sell kind of thing. It's like, well, it'll hurt the brand, and kind of depends on their political power within the organization. They're also thinking about their next step, in their career. So CMOs can seem mythical, but they are human. Consider from a personal and professional standpoint what are they trying to accomplish? It might be a case where maybe, the agency is going to get fired either way, but you could frame that 90-day transition as something in the client's interest. You might say, we over time, we have clients who change and we have clients who change to us. In our experience, in the initial example, 30 days is not enough to do a smooth transition. We want to make sure that stuff gets done. We understand that you're changing. We accept that. We're not going to fight that. The only thing that might make sense is a question about timing, right? Do you have a new agency lined up, ready to go? Sometimes they do, in which case that could happen fairly quickly. You might say, based on their schedule, how soon can they take over? And they might say, well, the other agency's backed up, it's going to be a month or two. Okay, well, it's probably going to be 2. If it's a month or 2, it's probably 2. In that case, you could potentially negotiate 60 or maybe 75 for like a couple weeks of overlap to brief the other agency, things like that. So that would get you closer to 90, not 30, not 40, and not 90, but closer. Thoughts on that particular approach?
And I think we've tried some different things. We're also going to implement a new part of our process when we onboard a new client contact, where one of the things we brief them on is their contract. So they kind of know the key provisions so we don't run into this issue.
Yes.
We don't have a kill fee in our contracts. They just have an out. Do you recommend a kill fee instead or in addition?
I do. You always have the option to waive it, but it helps to have it in the contract so I can give you some leverage if ultimately, you need them to make some other concession. If you're willing to concede on the kill fee, the early termination fee, that can help. Now, how much should that be? Some agencies don't charge one at all, and that's okay. I'll see as much as 50%. My kill fee is 25% for projects. I intentionally don't charge a kill fee in executive coaching because it's month to month. Like, I want clients to stay when it's a match, and if it's not, I'm not going to say, well, the plan was 12 to 18 months and we're at 12 and you're not going to say, if people want to go, let them go, kind of thing. And in spite of that, you can leave anytime you want. I have clients who are 4 years into coaching. So, it works in that sense. It is worth considering amidst the pieces here. Say it's a case where a client is unhappy and maybe they've asked for a refund or they want some sort of a make good, some sort of a thing. So do have the kill fee. Your lawyer can give you advice on that. 2 agency-specific law firms that I recommend: Matchstick Legal on the West Coast of the US and Sharon Turek in Cleveland. Both specialize in helping agencies. Matchstick did my MSA, including language, master service agreement, on the kill fee and things like that. But you also have a case where maybe the client isn't directly saying they're leaving, but they're unhappy. They're really unhappy, and there's sort of an implicit threat that they might leave. We've shared in chat an article about what to do. When a client's unhappy, they don't always want a refund. A lot of agencies are think to jump to a refund. But a client doesn't always want a refund. For instance, I get the Sunday New York Times, home delivery of the newspaper, and one Sunday a month or so, they don't deliver the paper. The thing is, I don't want a refund. I just want I want the paper. I don't want a refund. I want a redelivered paper. Even if it's the next day, fine. But the refund is not the top priority. So a key thing to do, and I'll be talking about this in an upcoming article of the Sakes Company blog, is a question that I use with my consulting and coaching clients. And you can ask your clients this as well. Ask them a simple yet powerful question. What is your ideal outcome here? And what is your minimum acceptable outcome? Maybe their ideal is getting some sort of a refund for the whole contract, which is, usually ridiculous. And maybe their make good is they get some sort of a thing redone. And maybe they want to add some other thing to the scope. sort of a minimum. Now you get to decide what are you willing to do, but importantly, it's hard to negotiate until you know what they want. What is their ideal? What is their minimum acceptable? Thoughts on that approach?
Yes, I think that makes sense. And actually, with the client scenario I'd mentioned, they had wanted a 30-day out. We had wanted a 60-day out, and so ultimately we came to the happy medium there.
Got it.
But you don't think we should ever hold a client to the full contract if everybody's miserable, right?
If everybody's miserable, it's hard to, I mean, I don't know. I guess it's like when people get divorced and can't afford to move out, get a new place, like no one's happy. And so the idea of like saying, let's extend this as long as possible because that's the contract, everyone's unhappy. And so, in general, it's worth trying to negotiate some sort of a solution. If it's not to the point of their leaving, maybe there's some sort of a make good, but don't take that forever. I had a client where, as a PM at one of the agencies, there was a scope change on their phase 2. We needed a new technical specification. My boss approved our coming up with the new tech spec at no charge. And we went through like 11 revisions, all unpaid. Finally, she pulled the plug on that because it was just a mess, kind of thing. So, don't let that go forever. But if it's at a point where there's, irreconcilable differences, you're at an impasse, I would recommend taking the high road on offboarding. Partly because it's the right thing to do, and also pragmatically, just because the client in general is unhappy doesn't mean everyone at the client organization hates you or is unhappy. For instance, I once had a difficult client where my day-to-day contact was great. Her boss was terrible. And I made a joke one day to my day-to-day contact. We're on the phone. I forget what I said, but she laughed at the joke. And then she said, "Thanks, I needed that. We don't laugh much here." Wow. But I knew why. Her boss was just terrible. And so in that case, say we had gotten fired, we weren't, but like say that it happened, if my day-to-day contact went to a new company, she would have happily recommended us because she liked us. The issue was that her boss, was difficult. So take the high road. Once it's clear that it's going to happen, turn over the files. Ideally, also in your contract, you have a clause that basically says, and your lawyer can write the exact language, they do not have control over the intellectual property until they have made payment in full. So in that case, you might negotiate that the kill fee really is sort of a buyout on the intellectual property that you've done so far, or things like that. You still need to sort out what exactly that looks like. But keep in mind, if they're willing to talk about it, that alone is a good sign. It means you might be able to sort it out.
That's great advice. Thank you so much, Karl.
Absolutely. Well, Katie, thank you for joining today. And let me know how it goes.
Will do.
All right. Well, thank you to everyone for joining Agency Office Hours. I'm Karl Sakas. We share advice every month, every second Tuesday. If you have questions you'd like to ask in a future event, submit them at the Sakas & Company website. We've got the full schedule for the coming year available. You can book any time coming up, free of charge, free to register. If you are not asking a question, you can stay off video the whole time. No more Zoom fatigue. If you're asking a question, you can get the answer free of charge. If you're thinking of applying for the Work Less, Earn More Bootcamp, get your application in. We're almost full for the next program. Go to sakasandcompany.com, SAKASAND, the word company.com/bootcamp, one word, and you can get the latest info, assuming there are spots still available when you go there. Well, thank you for joining. Running an agency is a challenge. It'll never be easy, but it doesn't have to be so hard. Thanks for joining today and good luck out there. See you next time.
Thank you.